sorry, basically just to understand simple. So OPEB stands for other post-employment benefits, so which really means it's all benefits that are provided other than pension. So it's benefits at retirement, so not while the employees are active. So for the district, you currently offer retiree health benefits as well as dental benefits. So OPEB will exclude any kind of pension or severance pay. So when you look at OPEB valuation components, when we do evaluations, there are essentially 4 different components in this valuation. The first one is the benefit provisions, which is really everything about the plan, like when somebody is eligible for benefits, and then what kind of benefits are offered, and then how much do the district pay for these benefits. So that's the benefit provision. This is something that you would have to provide to the actuary so that they can value the appropriate benefit. The second one is a healthcare assumption. Because we are valuing essentially health benefits, we have to project the healthcare costs. So we have a rate of increase in future healthcare costs. And then we need to make an assumption as to what healthcare plan that an employee can elect at retirement. It may not be the same plan that they elected while they're active. And then if they currently have spousal coverage, they may not cover spouses at retirement because the spouse may have coverage elsewhere. So we also have to assume the percentage of active employees who actually elect spousal coverage at retirement. So those all fall under healthcare assumptions. Now, on the economic assumption, it's really just the discount rate, because when we do an OPEB valuation, we do essentially a long-term cash flow projection, and then we discount it all back to the measurement date. The last bucket that there is an OPEB valuation component is the demographic assumptions. So for the existing retirees, they all have commenced benefit. So not all of them will live forever. So we have an assumption as to the rate of death at retirement, during retirement. And then for those who are currently active, not all active employees will make it to retirement. So essentially, we have an assumption built into the valuation as to those who terminate along the way. And then some of them may become disabled while active. And then once they are eligible to retire, not all of them will retire at the same time. There's different retirement rates depending on the ages of the participant. So those all fall under the demographic assumptions. Any questions? Okay. Moving on to the second part of the presentation, which is just a summary of the valuation results. I will not go through all the numbers here, but essentially what I would like to point out is that the column to the far right that says that is labeled 6/30/2019 was the last full valuation prior to the current one. So the most recent is the second column. So you read the table essentially from right to left. So the trend that we are seeing in the valuation results, which is the net OPEB liability, is that it continues decreasing from essentially 3 years ago to now, the most recent valuation. When you look at the funded ratio, it was at 58.5% as of 6/30/2019. And as of 6/30/2021, you are at 86.5%. So tremendous improvement in the funded ratio. So obviously, unfunded liability, both the liability and the asset comes into play in this calculation. So your liability has decreased slightly since 3 years ago, but your asset it has increased tremendously, especially in the past year. So that helped increase your funded ratio more than anything in this last valuation. Okay. And because the unfunded liability has decreased since 3 years ago, the actually determined contribution, it also has decreased because there will be a slide later on that talks about the actually determined contribution, but one component of the ADC is essentially the amortization of the unfunded liability. So as the unfunded liability gets smaller, the ADC typically gets smaller as well. So moving on to the next slide, what has changed since the prior valuation? So you did make one change on the, yes.
My name is Russ Thomas. I have a question on this increase in the assets that we experienced this past year. The net liability went down about, gosh, I know it was $3 million or something. And I'm just wondering if there's any risk looking forward for those assets to lose value. Aren't these tied to stock market fluctuations and stuff? So, what's your explanation about how vulnerable we are to a sudden loss in value and an increase in our net liability position?
So we, as the OPEB actuary, our expertise is on valuing the liability. It is not on the asset investment. So I believe you are currently invested with CERB. Is that correct?
In PARS.
With PARS. Okay. So PARS has several investment options. And depending on what option you choose, there is different mix of stock versus bonds that, your asset is being invested in. So obviously there is a volatility in any kind of asset investment that you pick, unless you are like 100% bond or 100% cash, which I don't think you really want that. So currently the discount rate is based on how the asset is being invested and what is the expected rate of return from the asset as being calculated by PARS. So those are not necessarily our areas of expertise. But currently, the way...
Sorry, just to expand on that a little bit, we always have a very conservative investment strategy, which is why that's part of the reason why it's so remarkable that the returns were so good over that fiscal year. But we would structure this in a way to mitigate risk of loss.
And one additional comment that's really helpful. A lot of agencies that we work with, we can model out the impact of different investment returns within our software. So if Matt wants to work with Evie, we can run those scenarios to see on a long-term basis how the district would be impacted. So while we might not opine on the risk, we can run those different scenarios so you can feel comfortable with the potential outcome of those changes.
So
could you repeat that, please?
Sure. So the district works with us not only for their OPEB valuations, but they have a modeling software with us that would allow folks on staff to help run different scenarios where if there were to be changes in the investment return for the OPEB trust, you could see on a forward-looking projection how it would impact the assets as well as the district's liabilities. So while we might not opine on exactly what the risk is, we could run a wide range of scenarios so you could have that sensitivity analysis to understand how you would be impacted by different changes. So when you're developing strategies, you can have a wider range of potential outcomes to make decisions on.
Okay, well, that's important to hear. hope that you will remind staff that capability is available to them at any time they need it. There are many of us on the board that push pretty hard to get a handle on this unfunded liability and make decisions and policy changes that in part help to change this asset position. We just, at least speaking for myself, I don't want to see it go backwards. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
So the presentation itself later has some kind of charts that was taken from the OPEB software that Max alluded to, and there is a sensitivity, the asset sensitivity that is included in the presentation, and we can run as many scenarios as needed. Are there any other questions before I move on? Okay, moving on to slide 8. What has changed since the prior evaluation? The district did make a benefit provision change where you rescinded essentially the CalPERS vesting schedule for newer employees. So those who were hired on or after October 1st, 2021, they will only be receiving the PEMCA minimum benefit at retirement. The existing employees who were hired prior to October 1st, 2021 did have a one-time buyout option where you can elect the PEMCA minimum benefit at retirement in exchange for initial deposit to retiree health savings account. There were 9 employees who elected this one-time buyout, and they are included in the valuation. This will become important when you look at the impact of benefit change on the next slide. In addition to the benefit provision changes, there are also a few assumption updates that we make. These are typical assumptions updates. So every time we do a full valuation, we will review all the assumptions that are used in the valuation to make sure that they are still in line with the expectation or historical experience. So both changes that I've mentioned reduce the liability since the last valuation. And slide 9 shows the gain-loss reconciliation for the liability as well as for the asset. So on the liability side, from the last valuation as of 6/30/2020, the liability was about $16 million. And due to passage of time and expected retirement, termination, or any kind of demographic changes, that $60 million was expected to increase to $16.9 million. But due to several changes with...
Excuse me. Could you give me a little more explanation on demographic experience?
Yes. So demographic experience refers to actual demographic changes that is different from expected. The district has a very small loss due to demographic experience. So it could be due to things like some active employees retire earlier than expected. That's one possible explanation. Or you have fewer terminations than expected. And remember that this is from 2019 to 2021. So those come under demographic experience.
So you're saying fewer retirements, or what was the first?
Fewer terminations, or earlier retirement.
Okay. Thank you.
So there are 4 different buckets that we can classify actual gain loss to. Demographic is the first one. Healthcare cost is the second one. Healthcare cost refers to Remember when I talked about the 4 components of OPEB valuation, one of the assumptions is a trend increase on how fast we expect the premium rates to increase in the future. If the actual premium rates are lower than what we expected the premium to be at, you have a reduction in liability due to healthcare costs. And that's what we are seeing. Essentially, the Medicare premium rate in the CalPERS plan has actually decreased since the last valuation. And then assumption changes, I mentioned about the healthcare trend rates and removal of assumption that active employees elect dependent coverage at retirement. Those created a little bit of reduction in liability. And then the benefit provision change. So the rescission of the CalPERS vesting schedule created a reduction in liability of about $400,000. I had a call with Michael before, and he mentioned why is the impact so small. So one thing that I want to mention is that when we do an OPEB valuation, it is based on a snapshot of data. Meaning that as of 6/30/2021, there are only very few employees who are eligible for the PEMCA minimum benefit. Because these are only the buyout employees essentially have a benefit reduction because they went from the vesting schedule to the PEMCA minimum. The rest of the employees who will be eligible for the PEMCA minimum, they are not hired yet as of the valuation date. So that's why you don't see the impact of their liability reduction in the valuation itself. There will be a slide later on where we actually project the liabilities forward 10 years, and then you will see that the impact of the benefit changes become more pronounced in the future. Any questions?
Not yet.
Okay. So we talked about the liability side. There is a $2 million reduction in liability, either due to actual experience compared to expected or benefit changes, that you ended up with $14.8 million in liability as of 6/30/2021. Now on the asset side, if we look at where the asset was at 6/30/2020, which is at $10 million, the expected contributions based on the ADC calculated by the prior actuary, it was about $265,000. That's how much contribution we are expecting the district to make to PARS. And with the assumption of 7% investment income, the asset was expected to be at $11 million as of 6/30/2021. What actually happened was there's more contributions than what was expected. So instead of contributing 265, the district contributed 563,000. And the actual investment income is 2.2 million instead of 711. And that's essentially what drove the asset balance to 12.8 million.
I got a
So
quick
just
question.
for-
What happened? What happened that was unexpected? The expected investment income was expected to be 7% or 711,000. What actually happened to make it come in so much higher at 2.2 million?
I think the market happened.
Okay, that's just market fluctuation. Just
Correct.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So,
Good night at the cards table.
so just for this year,
Something must come down.
instead of the benefit provision change, the fact that you contributed more to the trust and the stellar investment income, it has more impact on your unfunded liability just for this year. So moving on to slide 10, this just shows a graphical, in a graphical form, the historical unfunded liability and funded ratio for the past 5 years. The red bars on the left-hand side chart, it shows the unfunded liability. As you can see, over the years since 2017, it has continued to shrink, and you are at 2 million unfunded liability as of 2021. So you are moving in the right direction. And the same is true for the funded ratio. You know, it keep on increasing, and then it increased tremendously from 2020 to 2021, and a lot of it is due to the asset performance. Moving on to slide 11. I mentioned about actuarially determined contribution before. So the ADC is what we as the actuary recommend that you contribute to the plan, so that if you make this contribution regularly, your plan will be on a sound financial footing. You will be able to pay the benefits promised when they are promised. So there are two components to an ADC. It's the normal cost, which is essentially the cost to fund for new services, as well as the amortization of the unfunded liability. So whatever past liability that you did not fund, we amortize them, and you are paying them periodically every year. So when we look at the historical comparison between what you actually contributed and the ADC, that's what's shown on the chart on slide 12. So you are currently paying for retiree healthcare expenses from outside of the trust. And then you contributed extra dollar amounts into the PARS trust. So over the years, you have actually contributed more than what the ADC suggested. And that helps improve your funded ratio quite a bit, because any additional dollar that you contribute to the trust will earn investment income, and it essentially helps you. So for 2022, we had some conversations before with Stacy and with Michael, and it looks like the district is not anticipating any contribution to the PARS trust. So we are assuming that your cash expenditure for this coming year from your OPEB plan will only come from the retiree healthcare expenses that you would have to pay to your retirees. Now, the ADC is only $606,000. So what we are seeing is essentially, you are now having more expenses on the retiree healthcare side than what we suggest you contribute. So I would say, in the next few years, you may want to start considering using the trust to pay for your benefit payments. So you don't need to, use either your general fund or general asset to pay for your retiree healthcare expenses, but you can use the trust to pay for those. And it does not have to be like 100% payments of retiree healthcare expenses from the trust from the get-go if you are not comfortable with that. It can be a ramp up. But that is one of the things that, the OPEB software can help you sort of plan for when is the right time to start, withdrawing money from the trust to pay for your retiree healthcare expenses.
That's good news.
Any questions?
Yeah, this is Cindy. So with what you just said, start using the trust to make some payments and whatnot, how long of a time frame do you think that would be possible to do that before we get to a point where, man, we got to start putting a lot of money in again? I would imagine that's possible to happen. So when I hear you say, let's start using, don't use general funds, let's use trusts, and then we start using
Oh,
general funds
right,
for
right.
something else, and then 5 years down the road, oh, well, we gotta start putting money in there, and now we've dedicated general funds, and now somebody's gonna say we gotta find money.
Because didn't we have a level that we had to maintain?
Well, I guess,
So-
you,
I'm gonna let her respond.
okay, go ahead.
So when we build the OPEB software, we essentially start from your plan, from your population, and it has essentially your benefit structure. Meaning that, you know, as majority of your active employees who are currently employed retire, they will be replaced by new active employees who will be receiving a much lesser benefit than what the current employees receive.
Okay.
So when we do modeling in the OPEB software, you can see where the liabilities are going, and then you can model and put in, you know, what kind of withdrawal or disbursement that you want to make to the trust. And you can basically see whether your trust is going to be depleted when the last person dies, or whether you still have enough money ongoing to, you know, continue using the trust. The goal is obviously not to overfund the trust, and there is the one danger that you will run into if you keep putting money in it and not withdrawing anything from the trust. Because, you know, once you put in the money into the trust, it can only be used for retiree healthcare. You cannot take it out for anything else.
Right. So Michael, did you say that because we changed our posts and, you know, the retirement benefits, eventually, when everybody working here today is retired and gone, the liability for any kind of retirement is going to be so much less than what it currently is?
So it'll change. And I think it's important to point out that what we're, the operational expenditure that she's talking about right now, that we're currently paying for out of our budget, in addition to the, you know, the contributions that we made to the PARS Trust, are to fund current retirees' health benefits. And it's a defined benefit plan. So whatever the cost of that benefit is, we have to provide it. That's the change that we made last year. We shifted from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. We know what the contribution will be on a yearly basis, and it's not based on the cost of a health premium. That's over time that as we pay those defined contribution, more and more employees shift to the defined contribution plan. The long-term liability for the district goes down. So the smart thing for us to do is to start, you know, we track where that point in time is, and we start using the PARS Trust to pay for the retiree healthcare benefit rather than coming out of the budget, which is a really, like, that's an exciting day for CCWD when we can start doing that. And we'll still be making the contributions to the defined contribution plan that we replaced the previous benefit with. But this long-term liability will start to decrease over time, and we would want trust to decrease over time with it.
If that makes sense. On the defined contribution plan, does that contribution amount change? Is that like a negotiated type thing?
It is. It's set in the contract with the bargaining units.
So it can change every time the contracts are up when we negotiate a new one, that contribution amount
It could
change. Okay. All right, well, that makes sense to me as far as using the trust to pay for current costs.
Based on the state of where we are today, how far in the future do you anticipate that date be? I know it's just a guess or throwing a dart. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 2 years? What is it looking like?
I don't think it's that far out. Evie, did you have a projection on that?
We didn't quite run it that way when we did our analysis, but that is certainly one analysis that we can run. But right now, the way we see it, so if you go to slide 15, once you reach 100% funded, I would say that you are in a safe place to start using the trust to pay for your contribution, your retiree healthcare expenses. Alternatively, what you can do is going forward, you contribute the ADC. So you will still have to make some kind of contribution to the trust, but on slide 15, you can see that your projected ADC contribution under the new plan is about 600 or 500,000, but your benefit payment is way more than that. Okay, so you can contribute the ABC, but then you withdraw the retiree healthcare expenses from the trust. So essentially, the net of the two is it's negative for the district, meaning you are getting more reimbursement being paid to you from the trust instead of compared to what you are putting into the trust. So this is an example of why having a trust is smart and why putting in a lot of contributions up front more than what was recommended is smart, because all those money over time earn investment income. So your trust is working for you.
So we'll follow up on that and see if we can come back with a more a range. I mean, like I say, we're not going to come back with a specific date, but
Right.
we'll do some more digging on that and see if we can come back with a range where we might hit that point.
So I'm just going to go back to slide 14 for a minute, just to show you the liability impact of the benefit change over the years. What we saw in the prior slide, it was only 400,000 liability decrease from the benefit change. But if you project that out over a 20-year period, over a 20-year period as shown in the chart, it is very, very different, the liability at the end of that 20-year period. The solid blue bars are your liability, your projected liability under the new plan. The lighter blue bars, they are the liability, they were the liability before you made the plan change. So it is very different. And one reason for that is because your active employees, your population will eventually be made up of those who are only eligible for the PEMCA minimum instead of those who are having the richer benefit. Any questions? Okay, moving on to slide 16. This is where we have done some kind of investment return sensitivity. This is what Max mentioned before. So these outputs were from our OPEB software, and the bars are essentially the ADC under the 7% investment income that we are currently assuming. If the investment income comes in at 8%, your ADC will follow the dark blue line. So it will be lower than where they are right now. You are currently at about 600,000. It will continuously going down and reach zero by 2037 if the actual investment income comes in at 8%. If the actual investment income comes in at 6%, which is worse than expected, then you will see an increase in the ADC up to about 1.4 million in 2038, but then after that it drops. So this point where there's a significant drop in the ADC, that is when you will reach 100% funded. Moving on to slide 17, similar chart, but now it's on the unfunded liability metric. The 7% is the yellow line. That's what we are currently assuming, that you will get an investment income of 7% and you are expected to reach 100% funded in 2038. If the actual investment return comes in at 8%, you will reach 100% funded somewhere in 2032. So 6 years earlier than expected. If it comes in at 6%, you will still reach 100%. No, actually, you will never reach 100% funded. It's going to be around 200,000 unfunded liability if the investment income comes in at 6%. So in this scenario, we are assuming that you are contributing the ADC. And you actually withdraw benefit payments from the trust. That's what we are assuming when we do this charge. So there is another possible funding scenario that you can do. One way is to put in some additional dollar amount on top of the ADC that we recommended. Because everything that you put into the trust will earn investment income, 50,000 annual contribution until you reach 100% funded in the first few years will save you about 3.6 million over a 20-year period. So depending on whether you do have the capital to do this or not, you can consider doing just sporadic additional contribution on top of the ABC.
Which would be a significant reduction compared to the amount above the AC we've paid in the past. So there's
That is
still
correct.
there's still savings compared to historic contributions above the ADC. I mean, if I remember correctly, we were basically doubling the ADC. So $500,000 to $600,000 in addition to the ADC. And so a $50,000 contribution above the ADC represents pretty significant year-over-year savings to the district.
Mm-hmm. So that is all I have.
Thank you. Board, do you have any questions? Do we ask for any public comment on something that needs no action?
I just had one question about a possible funding scenario. If we had an additional $50,000 annual contribution above the ADC, where is that in our, can we even think about that?
Well, that's the point I was just making. Was in the past, up until this fiscal year, we've been paying $500,000 or $600,000 more than the ADC. That's what got us to the strong position that we're in right now with the PARS Trust. So going from that, no, that would be only 50,000. That's a savings of 450,000.
Oh, okay,
Right.
okay.
So we would be contributing far less out of the budget to the trust than what we have done historically.
Is that it? Okay, do I ask any public comment?
Yeah.
Okay, is there any public comments here in the room? How about online, Rebecca? Okay, thank you very much. And Michael, you'll bring back more if they're required.
Yep.
Appreciate the presentation. Thank you. Very interesting.
And I wish to thank Stacy for all of her hard work.
And Miss Stacy, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Max and Evie.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, very nice. Now we're going to move on to item 4B, discussion action regarding bond funding for proposed fiscal year 2022-23 through fiscal years 26-27, capital improvement plan, and hiring of 1 new construction phase staff.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick intro. Oh, sorry.
No, is it 1? I thought at some point there was 3.
That's 1 initially. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, a couple of different presenters on this item. So it's going to be a little bit of a team approach, which I think is reflective of the approach that it's taken to get us here. This represents, a lot of hard work over many months, and really ramping up over the last 2 months. The engineering staff, Damon and his team, Julio has been a huge help. Jeff's really jumped in and helped us get this to where it is right now. There are some changes even from when we presented to Finance Committee last week, and then some changes compared to what's in the staff report that went out on Friday even. But I think where we are right now, I'm feeling really good about the level of detail that we have behind what we're proposing here. Really appreciate the contributions from the engineering committee on the project list, from the finance committee on the financing plan itself. We got a lot of really tough questions, which really helped staff sharpen the pencil and dig into the questions that we need to be able to answer. So the two, just kind of skipping to the bottom line, the 2 actions that we're asking or recommending that the board take today. 1 is the adoption of a resolution that would direct staff to pursue the funding plan that we're about to present. Part of that plan is an increase in our capability to deliver projects. And so the second action would be is an amendment to the personnel allocation to add a construction inspector. We could, so that we could take that action now. We could start that action now. And that on that point, I think the ultimate recommendation that we'll get to, and we have a lot of information to share on this, is projecting probably 3 additional staff members in engineering over the next couple of years as we ramp up this construction activity. The recommendation to add this first position that we're asking the board for today is really kind of independent of whether the bond financing moves forward or not. We're already at the point where, with the amount of construction work we need to do in the next couple of years, we need some additional construction management oversight. So there's a lot more to go. We're going to dive into all of that in this presentation. But those are really kind of, I just wanted to set the table. Ultimately, those are the 2 recommendations before the board today. And then initially, the way we structured this, I'm going to turn it over to John in a minute to go through a couple of slides, just talking about the CIP process and the projects that are included in the plan and the prioritization process. And then I'm going to turn it over to Julio to talk about the recommendation on the financing plan. And then John and I'll come back in and talk about the staffing component.
Michael, you combined the hiring of 1 new construction staff. You combined it with the bond, and you said you want that regardless.
No, that's a typo. Sorry. We changed it. We corrected it in the resolution. We didn't correct it in the staff report.
Right, so you want those 2 separate.
Those are separate.
Like.
The first motion, under the recommended action,
would just be to initiate the private.
Yeah, you can delete
bond.
and authorizing the hiring of new construction phase staff. That's essentially the second recommended action.
So we'll actually have 3. So if
Nope,
we approve.
it's 2, it would be 2 recommended actions. 1 is direction to staff to pursue the financing plan that we're
Right.
about to pursue. The second is an amendment to the personnel allocation so that we could post construction inspector position tomorrow.
Okay, so.
And we
okay,
do that without changing the budget for this fiscal year. We've had enough turnover and vacancies to where we can cover if the person's able to find somebody and get them in to start prior to the end of this fiscal year. We don't need a budget amendment to cover that position for this fiscal year, but we would need a change in the personnel allocation before we could add that position.
So on page 1 of the staff report, under recommended action.
Yeah.
The first motion is
You can,
changed, just take the words "and" authorizing, and the rest of that sentence out.
exactly, everything after bond funding, you can just cut the rest of that.
Period after funding.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right, here we go.
So John, before you start,
Or not.
you're in favor of all this, right?
Of course.
Okay, all right. I have to get a couple.
Who wrote this book?
Like I said,
Is it a good book or a
it
bad
was-
book?
It was
If it's a good book,
co-authored.
then yeah. If it's a good book, I was part of the team. If it's a bad book,
Yes.
Exactly.
If it's a bad
We've all
book,
read this, we all have.
if it's a bad book, the consultants did it. If it's
Yep.
a good book, we did it. And Julio,
I don't think we need to go into a lot of great detail on this project.
You know what?
we're not going into a ton of detail on the project, just kind of overview. And this is what we would do every year when we present the proposed CIP update. So this is essentially the proposed CIP update, the 5-year rolling CIP. It was presented to the engineering committee earlier this month, and we're just presenting it to the full board here. This would be incorporated into, it kind of forms the basis of our budget as we develop the budget for the next fiscal year. So we just want to get, talk about the projects. If there are questions about specific projects, we can address those. But no, I wouldn't expect our plan is not to talk in detail about the individual projects unless there's questions.
Maybe have the presentation be a little less, more for potential questions.
Yep.
We've all had.
Let's let the presentation be.
Yeah, we want to try to answer the questions in advance. So go ahead.
Get our general manager.
President, Vice President, Directors, good afternoon. Is it up? No, okay. So the first slide you have before you is our capital improvement plan development process. So what you have in your staff report, table 1 is our list of all of our projects. You'll see there's roughly 50 projects. We take that list, get feedback from our operation maintenance team, because it's truly a team effort. We evaluate that list annually and identify new projects and any changing priorities, because we want to make sure that we're using our limited funds, on our most urgent project needs. Taking that all into account, there's a number of factors that we consider when we rank our projects. Once that ranking process is done, that all feeds into, Jeff says he needs it to feed into his budget and cash flow analysis. I'm really not sure why Jeff needs that, but we'll give it to him anyways. That was intended to be sarcasm.
You were just testing to see if we're paying attention.
Exactly. Yes.
We're more focused on where the staples are in the paper.
So jumping into
Well, this is going to be easy then.
yes, so jumping into we call these our highest priority capital projects. Every project is urgent, but we consolidated them into what we consider our top 23 along with the operations projects. So slide 3 shows you the list of presents a list of 13 water projects and 10 sewer projects. Quick snapshot, those 13 water projects, we currently have 3 under construction. 1 is out to bid. 2 of them are in design or environmental. 1 of them is next on the agenda to award a design contract, and 3 are out for RFP. So we're already moving forward on a number of those projects. Very similar message on the sewer projects. Of those 10, 3 are currently out advertised for bids, 3 are in design, and then a 7th is in planning.
Can you tell me, like, number 1's out for bid, 2, et cetera, so I can circle them?
Yes, so for water, the ones under construction are 1, 2, and 3. Number 4 is out for bid. 5 and 6 are in design. When I say number 6, that's phase 2. We've already completed phase 1, which is the erection of the structure. The one that is up for award today is number 10. 8, 9, and 12 are currently out on request for proposals.
The district courtyard, that's not the existing facility, but future tenant improvements?
Correct. Correct. That would be the improvements.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to take a look at that.
Well, that's, I think the total project number, not
Correct.
what's left.
Correct.
On on this list of 1 through 13, which one is the Redwood Tank in Copperopolis I keep talking about?
That would
Is
fall,
Tank B, so
this number 8.
Number 8. So
That's the one that is currently out for RFP.
Yay.
Yes.
Okay, excuse me, and I saw number 5 yesterday.
Yes.
not number 5. Let's see. Yes, you did.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I was looking at sewer, sorry. Yes, on the water side, you saw number 5 yesterday. One of the things that we have note on the bottom here that there are, I think it's an important one. There's another 20 projects that we've identified that
Right.
didn't make this list.
Yep.
So they're essentially years 5 through 10 at the current outlook, and that includes the Arnold Lift Station 2 project, which is another one that you saw yesterday, direct underhill, which I think, not getting to that over the next 5 years makes a lot of people really nervous. But that's how hard this prioritization process is. We have projects like that that are, I think could be considered critical that didn't even make the list for the next 5 years.
On the district courtyard, which is under water capital projects, I benefit both water and wastewater. Is there a cost split there or a reason it's all
It is
underwater?
split, yeah, and the actual expenditure, I mean, we could break it up and put it on either, but it would be a smaller side. When we draw from R&R funds, if we were going to draw from R&R funds to fund the courtyard, it would be the
7320.
7327.
Okay.
Is this the list of projects that you want to include for the proposed bond
No,
funding?
No, there will be
this is the 5-year CIP.
subset of these projects will be what we propose for the bond. So I'll go, so on the sewer side, if you're interested in which ones are out to bid,
Sure.
that would be 1, 2, and 3. 4, 7, and 8 are in design. And 9 is in planning.
9 is what?
In planning. Moving to slide 4, this provides a quick snapshot of, again, just summary of all of the projects, the total CIP amount, amount of the water projects, amount of the wastewater projects, and then the anticipated expenditures by year. And tables 2 and 3 in this staff report provide a graphical presentation of the schedule for these projects. Something that I'm going to touch on here, and then Julio will also get to as well. We want to make sure that the board is aware, this is an aggressive plan in that we do not have funding for all the projects listed here. So Julio will go through that a bit more, but that's the message that we want to continue to convey is we know we're aggressive. We are aggressively looking for grant funds and ways to fund all these projects right now. We don't have a plan to fund 100% of these projects. So with that great piece of news, I will hand it over to Julio.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Oh boy, I think I have to turn off my speaker. Okay, I can't hear myself speak. Good afternoon, everyone. We can go to the next slide, please. Can they hear me?
Yep,
Hear
we can hear you.
you good.
Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, there's just a delay on the slides. It's a slow internet.
Okay, my apologies. So we started this process several months ago, and as Michael stated, we had a larger capital project. In reality, what we're looking at is a 3 to 5 year, 1 to 3 year window, and in years 4 and 5, there's still additional projects that we're looking at. So really, that $90.1 million that you saw before on the prior page, if we start with that number, then we worked with the team looking at grant monies that were available, connection fees that you'll have due to growth, and your existing reserves. And then we came up with bonding capacity. And the bonding capacity really pledged the R&R revenues that we have available, these fixed fee revenues. And based on that amount, we come up with a bonding amount for both water and sewer of $18.8 and $10.8 million approximately. And I think it's important to note there's still a funding shortfall is far more pronounced on the sewer side than it is on the water side. But I think it's good news that we're here to say in this current market that we believe we should implement this as soon as possible, really due to three things. One, if we are going to finance projects, and there's only so much in reserves and connection fees, as you can see, we can't finance all 36 million capital projects on the water side, and certainly not on the sewer side. So we're going to have to bond finance a certain portion. If that decision is the case, then we think you should get to market sooner rather than due to inflationary costs go up. So sooner rather than later, and the market volatility and the high interest rate. Our recommendation is to issue tax-exempt bonds by a private placement to lock in rates, and I've explained that a little bit. And I think it's important to note in that little red dot below that the district plans to apply for grants, look for USDA subsidized loan and other state subsidized loans for the additional capital projects that we mentioned in the prior page for years 4 and 5. But we're looking at approximately 19 million in water bonds and $11 million in sewer bonds. There's still a shortfall, which we'll identify some point in the future, but that doesn't prohibit us from financing these projects now. We anticipate those plans for years 4 and 5 will be come clear in the future. Any questions?
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's the audio coming through a little bit choppy. Is it possible for you maybe to get a little closer to your microphone? That might help, because this is important stuff.
Yes, and my apologies. You know, there's always feedback with this.
We're getting most of it, but it's a little choppy. I want to make sure we're able to hear as much as possible.
Okay. So I'm going to go over once again. We started with the project list. We took out grant monies, connection fees, reserves, and then using the available fixed dollar or fixed R&R fees, we calculated the bonding capacity based on current interest rates. So we came up with 19 million in tax exempt bonds and 11 million in tax exempt bonds for the sewer side, 19 for the water side. And we still have funding shortfalls on each side. We anticipate that we will be able to identify those in the near future, but those are the costs in years 4 and 5. I have to turn back. Any questions at this moment?
How will the 28.3 million funding shortfall on the sewer side be addressed? I think you said it in the future, but how?
That's a great question. As we're still going through this, we're going to have to see if we can apply for grant monies, USDA loans, and other forms to identify funding solutions. But there's not an immediate one at this point. The other is a deferral of capital projects. But I don't believe that funding figuring out a strategy for the entire plan at this moment should prohibit us from moving forward to finance the most critical projects that we have on the list right now.
So basically, what the package that we have right now should fully fund the next 3 years if we're able to do what we have on the project list here. It would get us through the next 3 years of those projects. We'll come up against that shortfall most likely in years 4 and 5. So over the next 3 years, in addition to implementing these projects, we're going to hustle and find every grant and every other opportunity we can to bring in outside sources of revenue. Otherwise, we won't be able to complete the projects that are in the project list.
In that 3-year period of time that you're talking about there, I do see on the sewer side, sewer capital projects list on slide 3 that there's 2 projects that we're looking for the Army Corps currently.
Yeah.
The Pond 6 dam raise and the secondary bioclarification solids handling are 9.8 and 14.8 respectively. That's a chunk of that. Do we anticipate hearing getting an answer from the Corps within those 3 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we've talked a lot about because I think, I pulled the room a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, with a bunch of engineering and operations staff. And I think it was pretty much unanimous that Pond 6 dam raise is everybody's top priority on the wastewater side. But we also have a potential, at least one other potential source of funding for that project. And so at this point, the way we're looking at this is that we would not use bond proceeds to fund that project. It could be another year before we know whether or not Army Corps funding, Section 219 funding is going to come through for that project. But we don't want to use our financing capacity on that project and then find out that we get the funding. So
But how-
we're prioritizing, projects 2, 3, and 4, for example, and then doing everything we can to find another source of funding for Pond 6.
But how critical is that, Michael?
It's critical. They're all critical. That's the problem here.
So it's a
Um,
But
degree
it's
of,
more than ABC.
And then,
Right, and that's why we've discussed this one so much, and that's because it's a really tough choice to not pull the trigger on the number one priority, because those other sources of funding are not certain by any means. So if we get a year down the road, year and a half down the road, and we still haven't identified a source of funding for the Pond 6 raise, we're going to have to make some tough decisions at that point.
okay, one more question about sewer projects, and I'm still looking at that 28.3 million funding shortfall. But on item number 1, on the sewer capital projects, the West Point Wilsonville consolidation project, of that 5 million, I know we got a grant for almost all of that.
That is 100% grant.
100% grant. Is that included in that 28.3?
Yes.
And so we already know,
Why?
that it's,
No, it's not in the funding shortfall. It's included. So if you look at the breakdown above that, the
Oh.
4.7 million in grants,
50,
I think that's what's going to West Point Wilsonville consolidation. If I'm,
the 4.7 million?
yeah, on slide 5, where it
Right.
says 28.3 million funding shortfall.
Okay,
We
so that's
already- We're already using we're not counting that in the shortfall.
okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm trying to minimize the amount of feedback I get here. Once again, these are the funding shortfalls, and we have identified those. Recall, we started this process with a $115 million list, and we moved 30 million off to years 5 and 10. We have that $90 million list, and now we prioritize them further. So the next slide, if you may, were some of the projects that we were looking to use the bond proceeds for. And this is a little bit of an iterative process because as you know, you're asking these questions, is like grant money's available, some of the funding source. So it's a little bit dynamic, but these are the projects which are more than the bond proceeds, but we wanted to give you examples of what we currently believe we would use the bond proceeds for. That will still take some additional refinement. My objective at this time is I've encouraged the district, if they know they need to do bond financing, to get to the market as soon as possible. Just let alone yesterday, the Fed basically said they would accelerate rate increases, which means that interest rates will go up. And if you know you're going to borrow or want to take out a loan, you want to lock in those rates as soon as possible. I think it's important, there's a note down below that, as the bond documents will provide the flexibility to replace projects due to any unforeseen factors, availability of grant funding, increased connection fees, or delays in connection fees. I know that's something that staff and you will come up with. You have that flexibility to change these projects. If for some reason priority change, something happens, something unexpected happens in a failure of one of these facilities, the bond proceeds give you additional flexibility and capacity. And I think that's what's critical. Any question? This is an illustrative list. Any questions regarding that list of projects?
all I'm noting is how often Copper Cove is mentioned in this thing.
So now you're blaming me for
Both sides,
what a
you're
mi-
darn right.
the list being so high?
What a mess it must be out there.
Well, we picked these 3. Number 4 is La Contenta, probably. There's others that are also, like we said, the 10 that are included in the 5-year plan.
Lock and tennis. Problem.
Oh, no. Michael.
I guess
or-
Not yet, not until May.
Michael or John, on some of these projects, and I'm looking at the Copper Cove tank, can they be constructed in phases?
For
So
example,
that,
yes.
so for example, we don't have quite enough money to do all the pipeline replacement plan when we do the tank. You know, doing the tank first, but still doing it in phases where if we only have enough money to do the tank, and then, you know, next year we can do the rest of it or something. The tank just, is not anybody else concerned about that tank?
Yeah.
The answer,
The tank, I think.
answer to your question is
It
yes.
keeps me up at night.
In the way the RFP is structured is that we are looking to the consultant to recommend how we phase a project, recognizing that a couple of these improvements, the clear well and that B tank are our most urgent needs. And so how do we phase that? There's a lot of improvements proposed out there. Of course, we'd love to tackle them all at once, but that's not feasible. That would be too many operational impacts. So we're looking to them, recognizing that those are our two most important needs. How do we structure? How do we phase it? How do we time it?
And I think too, I want to acknowledge John and Charles and Damon and Kevin, that the engineering team, I think, has gotten, because of these trade-offs that we may have to make, they've gotten more creative in how we structure RFPs. So for example, the Copper Tank B RFP is not just Copper Cove Tank B. There's different components to that we may or may not move forward all at the same time. And we retain the flexibility to pick and choose how we're going to move forward in the most cost-effective way.
But, you know, when you're talking about taking pieces, I want to make sure that operationally, you know, we'll be able to use all of this, you know, and not just, because if you say, you know, do the tank, what about the infrastructure that has to go to the tank?
Well, the issue is that the tank is in danger of maybe collapsing.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Okay,
I
write
would
him a
wanna
check
be there.
now. This afternoon, Russ?
And it is the only way that we serve the whole, what's that, the east side of Lake Tulloch. And there are no tanks on the
Okay, and
east side of Lake
yeah.
Tulloch, so we have no storage on the other side of the lake. So if that tank fails, it is a critical point of.
Yeah.
of
And
the
we've heard
infrastructure.
that for
Not even saying if anybody getting hurt too.
several years, right?
While we're on that, the distribution part of that expenditure, this line item that you've got about Lake Tulloch submerged water line crossing, and we all have understandable sensitivities about getting rid of a sewer line that goes underneath the lake, but
Yeah.
why is it critical to replace a water line that goes under the lake?
So I could take a shot at that, but I'll let the engineers speak up to. In part, I think it's because of how critical that pipeline is. Like I said, that serves that entire side of the lake and there's no backup supply. And so if that line fails, it's not like a main in the street where our crew can probably fix it overnight. If that line fails, that whole side of the lake is going to be out of water until we're able to find a replacement for that Cross Lake pipeline. So that's one of the reasons why it rises up to the list.
I don't know where you can get 4,000 feet of 8-inch aluminum pipeline for pennies. So they just route it around surface until you can do it. Being facetious, of course. But the other thing is, looking at phased opportunities, the $9.8 million that keeps going up. That was $6 million when we started talking about raising dam 6 or pond 6. If the vulnerability there is the overtopping of the existing dam, why couldn't we just hog out a bunch of dirt out of that thing and put it on site and increase temporarily our capacity of that impound area without raising the dam? I mean, I would think that raising the dam is going to be heavily weighted on the expenditure part of it, but a couple of carryalls and a D8 or D10 or whatever, you can move a lot of dirt, create a lot of holding capacity.
If you give them permission to do.
So on that one, I won't go into all the gory details. Based on what the geotechnical engineers have evaluated, there's really not a lot of, we call it easy dirt to remove. It's all very hard rock.
That's why they make powerful equipment. They're all battery powered, by the way, but,
Yes.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah. So yeah, it's about 100,000 cubic yards of material that we need to break that down. We're since, you mentioned this in the past.
Yeah.
So we did go back and ask the consultant to look at it. They estimated about 20,000 cubic yards can be taken from inside the interior of the dam. I've been actually got an email from Tom Hicks and Tom Platts that they're saying they're gonna have an excess of about 19,000 cubic yards from when they build the road through there. So, you can, so that's about 20,000 cubic yards. And so we have a shortfall about 80,000 cubic yards still that we have to go find and borrow site for that material.
well, I've told you where to find it. No, seriously, it's on the adjacent property.
Yeah, we've asked them about that too. I think, so what Charles was talking about the material that we would use for the dam raise. But the need for the dam raise, the engineers have also evaluated that, and we can't get where we need to be by hogging out the dam. It was the response that we got.
Well, I don't think that you could get there by simply hogging out 20,000 cubic yards. If it would let you get through a couple of seasons, you're only going to have a problem in a 100-year storm event. So how recently did we have a 100-year storm?
We're in a drought here, aren't we? Well, this is sewer though.
So I'm trying to get you to think about spending your money like I try to spend my money. I want to,
Understood.
fund what I can fund this year and do the rest next year. So, or in the next, for 3 years, just looking at expanding horizons and looking at options. But there's 1 million cubic yards that were taken out of that mine that's less than 2.5 miles from Pond 6, due south, 180 degrees away, on the ground. You don't have to have an excavation permit. It's on the top of the ground. So just go get it.
Those are all things that we will look at.
Have you seen that file and that mine that I'm talking about? It's worth a field trip.
I've seen an aerial. I actually want to go out there and get a look at it myself. Yeah.
You talking about tailings?
Yeah.
A lot there.
Big mile. I think maybe I might underestimate it at 1 million. It's a huge hole.
So all of that is being analyzed as a part of the RFP that, actually, that's not an RFP, that one's already out. We're working with Keller on that one. Sorry, well, in the dam raise specifically, that's
Wagner and Bossier.
yeah. What's the first name?
Wagner and Bossier.
Wagner, thank you. I was thinking Wallace for some reason. And then Keller on the rest of it. So, but yeah, we're gonna find, and that is the work that has been going on, is how do we sharpen the pencil on all of these projects to the extent we can, knowing that we have this funding shortfall. So I can assure you that is happening. Those questions are being discussed, and we're going to come up when we come back to the board with, when it gets to the time where we're coming back to the board with a contract for construction, that what we're going to bring back is going to be the evaluation based on all of those, all of that analysis feeding into what we think the most cost-effective project is.
Michael and John and everybody, one of the hard things that I'm having with wrapping my head around is how you determine what is critical, what is the high importance. And I just don't, when I look at something high up importance, failure, not being able to give somebody water, or somebody can't flush their toilets. And like you talked about that water line crossing, and that is at 7 million. I mean, is it really that close to being critical to having that fail? I mean, it makes sense for us to have it sitting here like, we got to get to that someday. But is there something else more more priority. And I have said to you, you know, not everything's a priority because it can't be. Somebody's got to come first and then come on down. And so I'm having a hard time with some of those, just sharing. You know, I physically saw the redwood tank, so that one I don't have a problem with. But I do have a issue with if we get the tank replaced and phase out, I understand if that tank fills, we can't get water to that side. Well, if we replace that tank, the chances of it failing in the next few years until we have funding to do the rest, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at. And does it make sense on a construction side? Maybe not, because you have all the crew there, you know, in the equipment. So maybe getting it all taken care of is the right thing to do. But I'm just having a hard time understanding what is more critical than others.
So, and
I
I
don't
think
know how to resolve that.
we are phasing it and we're structuring these RFPs so that it can be phased. So that we're not proposing to do all of that at the same time. That's the total project cost. That's how we always do the CIP, is we include the total project cost. But when we're putting these out to bid, we're phasing them to the extent we can, and then we'll look at the response and say, oh yeah, you know, if it's going to cost if it's going to increase the cost of the project by 20% to phase it, we may not want to do it in that case. But if not, and we can do that piece, the most critical piece, and move on and get something else where that's at that critical point. That's the work that will happen as we develop these projects and bring them forward to construction. On the prioritization, there's a lot of thought that goes into that too, and it's risk of failure is really critical, you know, the ability to deliver the service. But in addition to that, it's not just risk of failure, it's what is the consequence of that failure? So, like, you know, that water, the Cross Lake pipeline is a good example where consequence of the failure at that point is significantly higher than the consequence of a main break in a road. So it's the risk of failure, it's the consequence of that failure, and then we also have to look at the regulatory compliance side of things. So if it's you know, we may not have as significant an interruption in service if lift station 2 backs up, although that will interrupt service, but it's also situated right next to a creek. And so if that backs up and spills into that watershed, we're going to get hit with pretty significant regulatory penalties. So that increases the consequence.
And it's not we were talking about the dam raise all of a sudden, right? It's a capacity thing. And it's not at capacity yet, but it could be if there's that under here.
We have spilled in Ponce. So it depends on the water year, but we're very close to at capacity. Except we had a notice of violation in 2018.
So, yeah, with some storm events.
Anyhow, so keep going. I'm just kind of sharing. I just, you know.
Yeah, no, those are good questions. I'm trying to demonstrate that work is happening. That level of detail will get, you know, much more deeper into refining these projects as they move through the design process.
So on, back to the dam, the raising of dam 6?
The dam ban.
In phasing in projects, and it's in design, is out for design or planning right now?
We're currently in design.
Okay,
and
design. So is the first part of that design to dredge out and get a couple of years? Is that before you raise the dam, or is dredging even part of the design, part of the project's design at all?
It always
So-
has been.
let Charles answer that one since he's.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the permitting constraints of dredging out the ponds. If we might, maybe that would trigger that activity, but good question. That is part of the next plan to raise the dam. So that's being.
See, and that's a project that I was just kind of scratching my head about. We're waiting for the Army Corps to get in, to see if they're going to get involved in a design, or if they want to be a designer, if they have to be to get that funding. And
Not for the design. We're comfortable moving forward with design, and that one really, we're just refreshing the design that was done 7 years ago, I think it was, or it was done before.
So really, you're kind of asking us to approve this 5-year CIP plan. Then when we go to slide 6, the project list, that's really for the bond funding that you're looking at, is that right?
That's right.
So should we go there? There we are.
48,000 feet.
And so just because we approved this CIP plan, does that mean we're doing it regardless, no matter how we find the money for us? Here's our, it's a guide to try and follow the best we can with money.
So let me clarify that a little bit. So we always bring the 5-year CIP to the board for approval every year, the rolling 5-year CIP. What we're asking for today is the authorization to move forward with the bond financing of the 11 million.
Oh, that's
19
right.
million.
We don't even have the CIP on here yet.
It'll
Just
be, I mean, we definitely always bring the CIP to the board to review at this time of year. But ultimately, the approval of the 5-year CIP would come with the budget.
Exactly.
There's no shortage of projects.
Yeah.
There's another
no
20 that
shortage,
didn't
there's
make that
no
list.
doubt that there's a need to finance some of these projects to move forward.
We will have to finance some of these projects
And and we need to get on it.
as soon as possible to
Go
lock
on.
in an interest rate.
Are you ready to make a motion?
Maybe a point and a half by the end of the year. So we certainly should be out doing this.
We should.
I mean, in my mind, we can dissect all these projects all we want. It's really your guys' job. But when it comes to financing, that's our job, that we have to move that forward. So
Correct.
I'd like to get onto the financing part of this.
One of the things that I'd like to raise is the fact that, we have personnel allocation along the same lines.
So,
Yes.
yeah, and I think Director Davidson brings up a great point. So we're going to get to the staffing discussion. But I think where we interrupted Julio was still moving on to slide 7, which really I think is it's an important discussion about how we finance.
Yeah. Julio is still with us.
Go ahead, Julio. Sorry,
I-
John.
Fine,
Is there
it's
anything
fine.
else you want to say?
No,
Whatever you do, just don't say, are there any questions?
No, this is a great part of the process. I think that's really, we've gone through a number ourselves. I'll step back and say when we started, the project list was 115 million. I asked staff several months ago to try to prioritize due to the risk of failure. This is on that sausage making page, right? The risk of failure, reliability, negative impacts on public health and safety, regulatory liability or legal liability, anticipated growth in customer base. They looked at all those factors, and remember, there's still another 30 million. And I know one of the board members is looking at how do you find that funding shortfall. But in reality, what we've gotten to as your financial advisor is that the market is moving in a direction. And the Federal Reserve has actually said, no one's guessing. They said, we are going to raise rates. And it's additionally 1.5% to 2.5% in the next year. So we have an indicator that money to borrow is going to be more expensive. And the other side, we know there's a funding shortfall no matter what we do. I know we'd like to have an answer to all of it, but we've talked about it being a dynamic process. But in this day, as I said, because of rising interest rates and greater market volatility, we should look at going to market sooner rather than later. And then having said that, you have two primary options. A private placement, otherwise seen as a loan, either a direct loan to a bank or purchased directly by an investor, or a public sale, which you get an investment banker and they sell it out to the universe of buyers. So you see these bullet points. The private placement is directly to the bank. You're going to go, for example, you have a private placement with Umpqua Bank, for example, right now for your pension financing, which you did a couple of years ago. There are some advantages and disadvantages of this. On the private placement side, the primary advantages are that you don't have to get a bond rating. You're not required to do an official statement. I don't have one on me, which is a large offering document that you have to make all these regulatory disclosures and talk about the financial state of the district. The maximum term is at maximum 25 years, so it's not quite as long. You have a single interest rate because you have one loan. The great advantage, there's two primary advantages. One, you have a rate lock. So if in fact the financing is approved, we can go out and get bids from various banks and get a rate lock in a very short period of time. And we would hope to come back to you and give you the results on April 13th. We'll bid out to certain select banks and say, hey, we have this rate today. In comparison, a public sale, you hire an investment bank, and they go through this process. You have to get a rating, go through an official statement, much more legal documents involved. And then at the day of pricing, which will be at least 60, 90 days from now, that's when you actually determine the interest rate. Now, when you think of this, the interest rate might be a little bit lower on a public sale, but in 90 days, our belief is that the rates will go up significantly, such that you're in a much better position to lock in rates in the next week or two versus locking them in 90 days. So that is one of the primary factors of doing a private placement. The other, and one that's critical, is this drawdown. I've heard a lot of questions. The way that a private placement loan can be structured is like a credit card, that you only get charged interest for what you've actually drawn down. However, on a public sale, if you borrow $10 million, you pay interest on $10 million, and you may draw down the money from the trustee, but you're paying it on that full stated value of the loan. So if you're not quite certain, or there's some timing issues, the private placement can be more efficient. And we believe for those two primary reasons, and the fact that you'll get your money sooner rather than later, we would highly recommend a private placement. I should note that 2-3 years from now, that might not be the same recommendation, but in the current market environment, we strongly recommend this. I know I literally had the same situation for an upland water financing that we are going to close Monday. And they were doing a public sale, and the rates were, this is right at the beginning, a couple weeks ago, and rates were really moving against us, and we went with the private placement. We changed direction because we're able to get a rate lock, and we didn't want to have that uncertainty in the market waiting for pricing for a month. So I think it's the same recommendation here, that the interest rate volatility in the market due to world events really behooves you to go and get that rate lock today with a private placement loan. Any questions?
I have one that should be not too bad. So let's say we do the private placement and we have funds available June 1. When do you expect the first draw to happen based on the projects you're looking at using it for? And when do you expect to be, kind of a timeline of what the draw period is? I'm just looking at the interest that we may pay, right, versus upfront.
Is there a draw, or is it just, will they just pay one lump? It'd be better if we took it.
I think it says it's
Well,
draw.
we lock in the interest rate. I think that's the.
Right, but what I'm saying is if you take, 5 million in the first 6 months, you're only paying interest on the 5 million.
Correct.
Right.
Is that how it's
I'm
gonna
just
start?
trying to get in.
That's how private
Yes.
placement works.
And I'm trying to get an idea of when would we be at,
So
total amount versus when's it, like, I'm gonna get it now and our first draw probably won't be till December or
we're
next
already
year.
spending money on the projects that we've listed. And so, for example, one of the top priority projects is Copper Cove lift stations. That's out to construction bid right now. Design's complete. We expect construction
Right,
bid back next
what
month.
city's asking for it? It shouldn't be that difficult. We've got a schedule. We've got these on
Yes.
a schedule. We
We
should also have a financing schedule when we need the money
Yeah,
available.
That would be,
It wouldn't be that difficult.
that'll all be part of our budget. Can I go back to,
That's fine.
wasn't your other question earlier? We can't spend money on next fiscal year's projects until July 1 and until next fiscal year's budget's approved. Those will all be shown in there, the cash flow projections, how these various projects are funded by what source. That's all part of the budget.
But to me, it makes sense, the private placement, that's, I think, the better use of the funds and not paying the full interest on something and not even using it.
I can't think of the term that when I first got on the board, we were financing things and the upfront, I can't think of the term of what the structure was, but the upfront costs were, 10%. It was
Well,
awful.
Yeah.
I actually think that's how they funded Ginny Lynn water treatment, and it was, it'll come to me as soon as I leave probably, but I mean, besides the interest rate, are there points? What's the loan fee of these?
There
two
are no
different-
points.
Before you answer that, though, I think we should have, 2 bids come in or something that says, here's how much we'll charge you to get this bond for you, because they're generally a flat amount. And then whatever your interest is, but that's not for the people who do all the work putting it together.
So if I may, if we decide to go with this financing, we would engage the placement agent, which would likely be from CSDA Finance Corporation. They'll put together bid documents. They will solicit bids from 5 to 7 different banks. We will set that out if this goes as quickly as possible. We set it out Friday. We'll have that document 1 day turnaround. We'll have a meeting, set it out Friday, give the banks 1 week to respond. We will then hopefully select that bank and report back to you April 13th with the interest rates. Right now, 20-year rate, we're using a slightly lower number, but I think you're around 2.65 to 2.7% for a 20-year borrow. So yes, we will go to multiple banks.
Sorry, Julio, could you repeat that last sentence? We didn't.
We will
Cost is
solicit
what-
separate bids for both water and sewer, and also allow people to bid out both if it ends up being advantageous. And we'll do all the calculations to figure out if a certain feature ends up to the benefit of the district or not. That is my role as the financial advisor.
So
think that answered.
I think what he said is they're gonna use like CSDA type placement agency. They're gonna get bids.
Right, how much do they charge?
Well,
So
we had
the
some
upfront-
estimates in here.
Julio, the upfront transaction costs is the question.
Oh, the cost of issuance for this is approximately $125,000. It's embedded into the fee of the financing. There are no points like a mortgage. If you want to view it that way, that is kind of the equivalent of points. That's the cost of all the people in suits, the lawyers involved, because this still is a security. So you have to pay the placement agent, the financial advisor, the trustee counsel. So all of these, basically, men and women in suits are expensive. You pay for those professionals, but that gets embedded in the cost of issuance, just like you would a regular.
We refinanced bonds here
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
with great success.
Yeah.
And so I assume we'll at least be soliciting, because we've got a pretty good history with bond counsel. Is that something, is that who we'd be soliciting with? or-
We'll bring back on at the 13th, I think, a recommendation on the finance team. Right now, if we can, I think we can speed things up if we use, so CSDA does a process where they'll do a competitive RFP, they vet certain providers, and then we can choose from them, which right now is, Julio, do you want to talk about that selection process?
Yeah, they vetted, they have preferred vendors. Those vendors are Oppenheimer, who did your last district refinancing, which is Sandra Lee and Flying Acres, I believe, that we did last year. And then for bond counsel, the lawyer that used Kutek Rock, which has 500 partners throughout California, throughout the United States, one of the largest corporate law firms, corporate government bond law firms in the United States. So those are their preferred vendors. Effectively, they've done this RFP a few years ago for you, so they've selected them. They give you aggressive price. The advantage is that you go through your CSDA member, that would be my recommendation. We've used them in the past. You've had other financing members, but these guys go through this process rather quickly. I know Oppenheimer as well as Jeffrey's firm are the top 2 in the private placement market, so you're in good hands.
I just have one final question on the private placement, the maximum term 25 years. That's the same for water or sewer, but do our sewer projects have that lifetime?
It's a great question. And we certainly wouldn't want to go beyond that, but we'll review these. I mean, because some of these are, when we start talking about lift stations and treatment plant processes, we're going to make sure that, I think being careful that we're not finding things where the debt is going to last longer than the equipment.
Can we structure it in a way where we pay those things off at a different pace than, shorter term sewer projects? Let's say we itemize that and say this thing only has a 15-year lifespan. We want that portion paid off in 15 years.
Yeah.
So we don't get behind.
And we're doing that right now with the meters, with the USDA, the loan term of 40 years, but meters are only projected to last 15. So we're going to pay it
The
off.
last one lasted like 70.
That's right.
Put some of them when he first moved
There's
here.
some trade-offs there.
Nothing lasts.
But yeah, Jeff or Julio, we've talked about this too. Do you want to talk about the prospect of early payoff?
Yeah, there's two other things. One, yes, we can structure what you'd call series. We could do it in groups and have repayment terms for 5 million of the loan could be in 5 years and the other in 20 years. That's simple mathematics that gets related to it. But two, the second part is the ability to refinance. These bonds will have an 8 to 10 year call. In fact, that's one of the advantages of a private placement loan is sometimes instead of a standard 10-year refinancing option, in other words, after 10 years, you can refinance from a low to high financing. Private placements often might give you an 8-year term as opposed to a 10-year term. So you can refinance at a lower rate even sooner. So that's an even greater advantage if you have interest rates in the future that make it advantageous to refinance. Do you have any comments, Joe?
Yes, just to follow up on that, in a number of transactions we have done when I was there with the district, the banks give you the option to prepay, but you obviously get a penalty, and that neutral zone is usually around 8 years. So there's no penalty for prepayment at 8 years. 5 years, you may pay 102, 3 years may pay 103. But going to what you were talking about, Director Davidson, if we have the funds available on the sewer side, after 8 years, we have the ability to pay down that loan without any penalty and thus align it to the assumed asset life of that particular facility.
Even we could just have an internal accounting for that, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can actually have a direct repayment stream. We can do 2, 3, 4 series that actually finance specific projects, and you say $1 million is over 7 years. It may even have a different interest rate if it comes out to that. But you're able to repay this. Usually they give you a single rate and you say this is a 5-year repayment, this is 10. But most of these assets are pretty long lived. Like, isn't that correct, John? These have long average lives.
Correct. Projects that are listed there are.
Well, I would just assume when we develop a budget, we're gonna account for paying for those sewer projects in their lifespan. If it's shorter than 20 years.
Yes. And to follow up on that, if I'm not mistaken, John, if I remember correctly, some of those life expectancy of those lift stations, sewer lift stations, has been less than what they anticipated. Because I remember it used to be a good 20 years, but in some cases, depending upon the corrosive nature of the system, they may go down to 15. And that's where we may want to look at after a few years to see if we want to accelerate the payments on the loans. So in case we do need to do some type of refinancing, or additional loans in the future to pay for additional improvements.
All right.
Yes, that would be all part of the process we look at.
Want to move over to labor side, Michael? Staffing side.
How to, so unless Julio, unless you have anything else, or unless the board has questions on the financing side of things, we can move to slide 8.
I just had a question on page 7 of 17 that each firm has provided a price confession. What exactly is a price confession?
Yeah, I did say that.
The question is, what is a price confession?
Confession.
I think it's a misspelled concession, but it's just talking about that they may lower the 115,000 or the 125,000 for each transaction if you combine them. So
It's in the board.
anyway, just trying to bring a little
Jeff and Julio, do you have any thoughts on that?
levity. Very
Yeah, the
small.
confession.
Julio?
If in fact it's a single rate, there was a
Catholic.
that the provider-
Hold on,
like
sorry,
Danny?
we can't hear you. What's that?
It's okay.
He wasn't serious, you guys.
Yeah. Let's move on. Staff. Thank you, Julio.
Okay.
It's the Vatican Bank probably.
We gotta confess how they.
We told you we were gonna look at every possible source of funding, so.
The Vatican Bank would charge you a lot more, but.
I have one little question on page 3, where it said the loan documents will provide the district the flexibility to swap out projects.
Yes.
Okay. Existing district policies do not allow for swapping out. Do we have to?
without board approval. So we
Without
would,
board
on all of these projects, we would never be able to spend the
Right,
type
no,
of money that we're talking about here without board approval.
Uh-huh. And it doesn't make sense to change board policy?
No, we would always want board approval
I
on
would
that.
want board approval.
I would
No,
not.
no, but you would put in the board policy the fact that it would require.
It already
I would
has-
not be comfortable with that.
Oh.
I would like to have board approval for the expenditure levels that we're talking
Yes.
about.
Okay, well, I just,
Only the point that.
And I think the board would like that. I think the board would want to keep
John,
that.
are you going
I
to?
understand
Giving away
that.
the farm.
I go condense.
I'm not giving away the water.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump,
Oh, the only point I was gonna say is the legal documents won't restrict you. Your own policy is what you're adhering to, but you don't want the bank to restrict how you operate.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into on slide 7 and kind of kick this off, and then John's some really good work on comparing labor costs. But really what, and I'm gonna try to start moving a little bit more quickly, but what we're looking at doing here is a pretty significant increase in construction activity, be ahead of what the district has done in the past. So historically, roughly 5 to 7 million a year, and some years even less than that. This year, we've ramped up. We're doing probably 9, maybe even a little more than 9 million. And we're pushing as hard on staff as we can. So just averaging out on an annual basis, if we look at the total 5-year CIP plan of the 9.5 million, including the bond funded projects, grant funded projects, developer funded projects, operations projects, all of that. And then with the assumption that we're going to need to find some more funding to complete it, we're looking at about 22 million a year on average of construction costs. So more than doubling what we've done in the past. Where we've taken a close look at where the staff capacity limitations are in order to manage it in a way that makes sure that we get the construction. You know, when we get a project, it's up to the district standard. It's going to last as long as possible. It's as cost effective as possible. We need to increase our construction management capacity. So that what we're looking at, and this is after reducing it down from what it was initially, because we're trying to, be as efficient as possible. But we would project needing probably 3 additional staff members in the engineering department. What the analysis you'll see here is 1 engineer and 2 inspectors. That's not something that's set in stone. We would need to adapt depending on where we're at in the project cycles and project need. What we're proposing today is that we know we need at least 1 additional inspector already. The other 2 would come as the need arises, probably at some point over the next fiscal year as we ramp up construction in these projects.
Michael, are you asking the resolution for 1 this time, and as you need more, you bring it back to us?
Yes.
Okay.
So, so that's the request, the projection at this point, understanding that these things are dynamic as projects are. And then,
What's that 18% developer reimbursement referring to?
yeah, good question. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about that at the staff level. So we're projecting at least 3 significant developer funded, and when we say developer, it may not be the right term always in this case, because one of them is the Jenny Lind Elementary School force main, which isn't a developer per se. So reimbursable projects. So that's a project that Jenny Lind Elementary School got a grant for. They're responsible for the full cost of the project, including reimbursing the district for our construction management and inspection services. So, and then we've also got the Coppertown Center force main, Reed's Turnpike, water pump station in Copper that we are anticipating moving forward over the next couple of years. So just those 3 projects alone are projected to come in at $13.4 million. And the district is on the hook for inspecting those so that when we take ownership of them, we know we're getting a quality facility. So that the reimbursable portion of this is what we came up with, the 18% of those new positions. Initially, we were thinking we could probably fund a whole FTE just to manage these projects. Plus, we know there's some subdivision development in Valley Springs, some subdivision development in Copper that also is reimbursable inspector time. So that's a conservative projection, I think. But to make sure we're not overestimating on that front, we've reduced it down from projecting potentially funding an FTE over the next 3 years. With reimbursable projects, we took a factor of 18% in each of those 3 projected positions over that time. So that's where we came up with that number.
Where's Reed's Turnpike?
Copper.
Copper. Everything.
There's Copper again.
Slide 9 is just a snapshot of labor costs. One model, one calculation. So that reflects our current labor costs, engineering operations, as well as our new utility underground crew, and then also 3 additional in-house staff.
I'm sure we take a look at private inspection services.
Next slide.
We'll get to the next slide.
Next slide.
There's many ways for us to handle and staff the construction service. We can use all staff, we can use our consultants, we can use a hybrid. Either way, this is like any remodel house. We just don't give the keys to a contractor, say, here you go, we'll come back when you're done. We'll be able to take the keys back. We need a team to make sure that we get what we're asking the contractor to build. They don't cut corners, we do quality work. So we know we need an increase in the bandwidth of our construction team. That's what we said. There's different ways to do it. For comparison purposes only, we wanted to show how it would work if we went with all in-house, 1 senior engineer, 2 inspectors versus 2 full-time consultants. And the reason there's 2 versus 3 is, again, we recognize that some of those costs are going to be reimbursed by the development. So we're trying to show an apples to apples total hours spent on capital. We also factor in when we hire our new staff internally, they'll need vehicles, they'll need computers, laptops, there'll be ongoing maintenance costs. So when we factor all of that in, we could see up to $1.8 million in savings by hiring 3 staff versus having consultants, fully staffed by consultants. And one of the other things I have to keep in mind too is if we look with the all consultant, even if we look at the hybrid or the all consultant model, that still means that an engineering team that is in-house will have to spend some time managing and overseeing them.
Will you explain the CIP hours and the effective hours? Are you looking at things as 2,080 hours a year for full-time?
That is correct.
So these numbers.
And again, what we look at with CIPs, that's how many hours they're going to charge to CIP funds. But there will be, this goes back to that 18% we talked about. There will be some time where these staff members are development. So that's, again, we're trying to give an apples to apples comparison of that number of hours totals effect on CIP funds.
And what's effective hours?
Julio, can I let you answer that one?
Certainly. It was trying to come up with a comparison between the CIP hours and effective hours was the number of hours. Well, what you don't see on the in-house construction oversight is that's not the full carry. We were expecting some of it would be for CIP and another portion would be for operations. So we said, okay, these are the effective hours that we were charging to the in-house construction, the actual hours of CIP work that they would do. So if, let's say, they were doing 73% toward construction management, actually, let me get the exact ratio. And then the other portion set aside, we said it's actually 4,000 of direct billable work on the projects. So that was kind of the standard that we used for the private sector construction oversight. And then we added that project supervisor. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're trying to say, but I still look at it, an employee gets paid, you know, they work, let's just say that 2,080 hours.
Correct.
And what does that cost? I don't care how you divvy it up. Sure, we can get money, recoup some money, but it's still an employee that's going to get paid and all the benefits forever.
It
Right,
has,
but
I have a hard time with all that stuff.
oh, let me
still.
say it differently. I now had the percentage in here. It's 2,080 hours a year, less what we were expecting in developer or labor reimbursement. So we were anticipating about 1,144 hours would be reimbursed, or about $100,000 would be reimbursed for things like the General Land project or developer related projects. So that meant the remainder gave us 5,000 hours of labor. And then we estimated what would be actually directly overseeing the project. And that's how we compared it to the private sector construction oversight. So that represents 82% of the labor, because we were expecting that 18%, if you recall from the prior page. And then we said, okay, of that 82%, how much would actually be done directly overseeing projects?
The way the table's set up is we take the hourly rate wage times the number of effective hours to come up with the total compensation. So we're looking at, I'll pick one here, for example,
And
senior.
again, that's comparing apples to apples to if we outsourced it. But the total cost is going to be more than that, because they're going to be paid
Correct.
all
They'll
year
be,
long, no matter what. And I just, you know, are we going to need a fully staffed, you know, additional inspectors, 2 additional inspectors and a senior engineer? We have a senior engineer. How many do you need? Isn't that
We have
the
3.
manager?
So
So why is there because
so
they have
the-
more experience?
Well,
perhaps?
That's why we phase this. So we know there's a need for one now, even if we weren't, you know, even if we were to outsource a lot of construction management, we would need that additional capacity in the engineering department. If that model is working well enough for us and we're comfortable expanding and adding on additional projects without adding additional staff, then we would do that. That's why we're not proposing a personnel allocation of 3, you know, along with this plan. But what we're presenting here, because we also don't want to take the board by surprise and adopt a financing plan and then come back a year later and say we need 2 more bodies that we didn't tell you about.
Well,
So we're trying to project realistically, if we were to implement all these projects, what we think we're going to probably need at some point over this 5-year period to add in capacity. It doesn't mean we will hire 3 full-time employees or add these bodies to the engineering department. We're not at all setting that in stone. We're not locking that in. It is rolled into the projection for our bond financing capacity. So we know we're going to have these costs one way or another, in-house or outsource. But we're going to proceed with caution and only add where we need to, or if we're comfortable managing using more outsourcing, then we can, you know, stick with that model. There will be some combination of those things to a
you
certain
know,
degree.
having an employee is really expensive. We just looked at our
That's right.
post and, you know, retirement benefits alone are huge. And so it's a huge commitment. You know, we're looking at trying to say, okay, for 5 years, you know, in theory, we're going to always have projects, but will we always have that need for that much? Are you saying that we're going to do $9 million a year in CIP every year going forward, or whatever that magic number is? We used to do 3, now we're at 9. Is that what you were saying? Your
So we're looking
projection?
at going to 22.
22. So,
And if we get to a point after year 5, we know that there's a lot of projects for year 5 to 10 as well.
So-
But if we get to a point after year 5 where we are able to decrease the rate of project implementation on a year-to-year basis, we may be able to, you know, reallocate these employees as needed. If we don't need as many inspectors, it's one of the great things about inspectors is they're usually multi-talented. Is Jared here? I'm not trying to, don't get a big head over this, but we've had the situation arise in the past where we need additional inspection work, and we're able to draw from highly skilled construction workers or water distribution workers, and vice versa. We had 2 inspectors 2 years ago, and we it felt like we needed that person to, be in, back in the field, and that person's now a water distribution operator. So we have some flexibility when it comes to inspectors, and we know, there's always some attrition and turnover among field staff. So if we got to that point in 5 years, and that would be great. I think that would be a huge success. If we get to a point in 5 years where we're actually ramping down our construction activity, it would be because we knocked it out of the park with these projects, and we're still gonna have a lot of projects to go going forward, but it may be 10, 12 million a year, not 22 million a year. I think that would be really, really positive. But we would have flexibility in terms of how we allocate those positions, which is also why we initially, to do this work, we were looking at 4 or 5 potentially. But we don't want to overextend ourselves. We only would even go up to 3 if we feel like that's really necessary to implement projects responsibly.
Anybody else? Russ, go for it.
Yeah, I need to be convinced a little bit more completely on this hiring. There seems to be a sense of urgency that we got to do this today. And I'm just looking at this 5-year CIP list. Jared, we heard several weeks ago that he's working beyond capacity or putting in a lot of hours. But what project or projects would you put an inspector on, a second inspector on tomorrow?
Yep. So for example, that goes back to slide 3. When President Skata asked, what projects do we have out to bid right now? We have
Out to bid.
which means we'll be under construction very soon, and that's why we need additional staff.
Well, but
We have-
before you, out to bid, the bids come back and we evaluate those, and it goes through agendized board meetings and stuff. It might be 4 or 5 months from today before we actually put a shovel in the ground. So,
Which is usually how long it takes to get a qualified staff person in-house and up to speed. And with the construction season approaching, that's why we think we don't want to wait until the fiscal year. We're asking for approval now.
And
So there's sort of post the job and to interview and to get someone on board,
Yep.
ramped up
correct. And 2,
4 to 5 months, 3 to 4 months.
we've got an inspector on staff that used to be an inspector. Now he's a distribution guy. So
What is the qualifications to be? What tests do they have to pass?
So do we have certification requirements for inspectors?
You have to, it's written in ours, we have special certification that the district determined, which I did, was the RCI.
Hey,
Registered Construction
We have a lot of people online. You might come to a microphone to help. Thank you.
Years ago, the district decided to have a specialty cert for inspection. When they hired me, they didn't quite know what that was going to be. So we looked into it and we worked with different outside inspection and asked around what was utilized in this field. And we did it's called the RCI. It's the Registered Construction Inspector. It has different fields that you can be certified in, which I did engineering. So I'm a registered construction inspector for engineering, which our senior level is what requires that. And then we also are required to have a QSP on staff, which I've done. And you have to be double certified for that with assessment and your QSP cert. So you have
What's that stand for?
qualified SWEP professional or practitioner.
Stormwater prevention, pollution stuff, is that right?
Yes.
Well, we're not, we inspect our SWEP projects.
We do with our contractors to make sure they're following the PMPs and the SWEP plan that is usually implemented on these large scale projects.
Why
When we
would,
did Reach 1 and Reach 3, we had a SWEP firm that actually designed it. It becomes part of the bid documents. And then I make sure that they are adhering to that. And then we have the SWEP agency that designed it. They do their inspections.
so why do we need 2 inspections? You and them.
Because they're the design, they're the design engineer. They're no different than our design engineers. My job as an inspector is to make sure that it's being installed to their design plan.
But I know like at MSD, the contractor had to hire somebody and come in and they weren't part of their team. They were just a contractor that's putting their license on the line saying we inspected and it's good.
They
So-
do have third,
so-
and we have that going on right now with KW Emerson. They
Right.
have an outside firm because they don't have a QSP on staff with them
So
to,
they hire a firm to inspect and you hire what they inspected.
no, we do not. We do that on our large scale projects that we are funding ourselves.
Okay.
So, but I would also say, I think it's really important to point out, in addition to those certification requirements, it's a unique skill set. It's got to be somebody with construction experience, with really good communication skills, really good documentation skills, that really understands district standards inside and out. So there's in addition to those certification requirements, it has to be a highly skilled
So,
worker.
go ahead.
I just wonder, it would seem to me that, that all of our construction crew has construction knowledge. Now, I don't know about their, documentation skills, but certainly seems like something that we would try to recruit and maybe have a dual purpose or a dual job title where they could bounce back and forth.
I would be very surprised if we don't have internal candidates for this position.
Well, I'm not talking about a full-time inspector. What I'm talking about is a hybrid.
So we talked about that we have had those discussions at the staff level, and right now, and with the way that our operations and field crews are set up, it would be really difficult to pull somebody away from a crew. That's why when we had 2 inspectors, that's why we put one back out into the field, because we're constantly, there's a trade-off there. And right now, we don't feel like we have the extra bodies in the field to pull one into inspection services on a regular basis.
What are the inspectors inspecting right now? What jobs out there?
The Ebbets Pass tank replacements. Next week or Monday, we start the Sheep Ranch fire protection tank, the underground for that. And then in between projects, we review RFPs, we help with the design. I assist field crews. And then take care of, the one thing that this is also not showing is the day-to-day activities of when a customer calls in and says, I need an inspection, you're there within 48 hours.
Inspection for.
A connection, a final for their house to get finalized with the county.
We're doing those?
Yep.
Not the county?
The county
County
does
does
on the other side of our cleanup.
County
So we
doesn't-
connect our connection to the cleanouts, and we also do a final inspection to make sure boxes are set properly, concreted in, and they're not just buried.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about the whole just normal.
There is that normal day-to-day that when you get the call, you have to drop everything and go take care of our customers.
We are, we're definitely seeing the development, residential development spike, and I don't know that that's gonna fall off a cliff here. I mean.
No,
might
Jared-
just slow down a bit, but.
Jared spent a lot of time over the winter and last 6 months down at Gold Creek 3.
Now, can these inspectors also be trained to do the location?
To do locating? To do what now? You mean like the TV inspection?
Or line
Like a
locates.
USA dig inspection or something?
They can. The problem with, unless you get somebody that's an in-house hire, I couldn't go to each one of our districts and tell you where our facilities are.
Yeah, so it's better just for our field guys to.
That's something that our field guys are a one-on-one, day-to-day basis with, we're kind of a roving. I'm on one side of the county today and I could be on the other tomorrow.
Yeah. All right.
To answer your question, another project that's starting is Tri-Dam. As soon as we get the easement there for the water line, we'll have, so now I have to travel from Camp Connell, where we're working up at Tank 8, onto Tri-Dam, all the way at the drug rehab center for.
Are you the
Dayton
only
center.
inspector right now?
That's it.
Okay.
But there was a line item for a helicopter in the budget.
I, for Learjet,
You would buy a lift truck. What do you?
All right, yeah, folks, do we need more information? Do we want
No, I'm
to?
ready to make a motion.
Go for it.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job.
Jared.
Let's move this. What's the story with this? We're doing the,
Look on the agenda.
So the staff recommendation is the motion to direct staff to move forward with financing plan, the private placement. And then the second resolution is, the second resolution is the amendment to the personnel allocation that would allow us to move forward with a construction inspector.
we need, can I make a motion to adopt a resolution directing staff to initiate the private placement process for bond funding?
Second.
All right, we have a motion. Should I do some public comment first?
Yes.
Any public comment here in the room? Seeing none? Rebecca, any public comment online? All right, all those in favor of resolution initiating a private placement process for bond funding? All those in favor? say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to amend the fiscal year 21-22 personnel allocation.
For one
And that's adding one.
inspector.
One.
Okay.
Adding one.
Adding one.
Adding one employee. Second.
Any public comment?
Can we modify that to say that?
Yes,
Because we've been talking about.
that's what the motion is.
So
Okay.
that is, it is,
Oh,
the
okay,
personnel
fine.
allocation is included is attached to the reso and it
Okay.
only adds one position.
Okay, thank you.
So any public comment in the
You
room?
really don't trust me, do you?
Hey, we gotta,
Not at all.
All right, seeing public comment in the room, Rebecca, any public comment online? All right, all those in favor to amend the fiscal year personnel allocation for one additional inspector?
Not inspector,
Aye.
that's not right, is it?
Yes, this is to amend the personnel allocation to add one inspector.
Okay.
Yes. All right, so all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All righty, that passes.
Where didn't we start with that?
Saved a lot of
All
time.
right, we're moving
Thank
on
you.
to item 4C, discussion action regarding award of professional services agreement and budget adjustment.
I make a motion, we adopt. a resolution.
We got a second.
We're moving, I know we're ready to move on. Thank you, Julio and Jeff, and
Thank
thank
you.
you to the board. This is a really, really huge endeavor. I
Yeah.
really appreciate the support and I'm really excited about this direction, so.
Charles, we're going to
Thank
take.
you guys online. Good
Thank
job.
you.
Appreciate
We're
all the
just gonna Take a
info.
quick little break. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was right in the middle of my motion.
I'm ready. Russ, I would recommend not doing your after meeting swim in Lake Tolan today. Choose a different location. Silver Flats.
All right, here we go. Bertha, you're over there too. Hi, Charles. Item 4C.
Shores. Keep it.
So this is the Genuine AV water transmission pipeline. This is a project. Yeah, this presented to the board of engineering committee. So it's a pretty well-known project. It's basically there's water leaves the water plant goes to tank A and they're restricted to the other reservoir system. So in this particular water transmission main, transfers water from the A tank just closer to Silver Rapids, and it follows 20,000 feet along Hart-Vixen and Baldwin, Usher to tank B at a very high elevation. It's been a significant bottleneck in like some heat waves when there's a lot of water demands, and the pipeline is undersized for current
water use under those conditions and for projected future water use. So it's a very critical project. Also, we do have some pressure issues in Jenny Lind, and this pipeline's probably contributing to those in a region of the system. So,
Can you, I think we all understand the deficiency of the system. Could you speak to the reason for recommendation? We talked about this at the engineering committee, and for comfortable with Coleman Engineering, which is your recommendation. It is slightly higher, but the number of hours are significantly more. All this surveying is going to be done by local contractor. So I just wanted to, give the rest of the board a summary of why you decided to go with this firm.
right, yes, it did go to engineering committee, both you and Russ were supportive of the project.
It was dicey, but
And that's the engineering committee's recommendation as well.
yes,
so that-
yes, strong.
Okay, do we need any other information then?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
And I do want to point out that Simon Gray, who would be the project manager, is here. He also showed up to engineering committee. He also did work on the Tech pipeline for us in Pass, and
He's been around for years.
he's all pluses for me.
All right, question.
What's your question?
Simon, this is a question for you, and I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I was just struck by this. Even here, this said the district anticipates either a 12-inch diameter class 350 ductile iron pipe or a 14-inch diameter DR-14 PVC pipe. What would be an argument for one versus the other?
Primarily the frictional issue, I guess. Primarily, I think it would be a frictional issue with the difference between plastic pipe or a ductile iron pipe. So the bigger the pipe, the less the loss you will get. But it depends on where you are on the head discharge curve as to whether it makes a difference or not. That's something that will come out more, basically.
Yeah, there hasn't been a decision made on that, but we've used ductile iron on the past. It can handle a lot of pressure, so you can run it up to 350 PSI and isolate it from the distribution system and transfer water at really high pressure. Not so confident in as much as a PVC pipe, so go a little bit larger diameter and operate at a little bit lower pressure. So that's kind of a trade-off.
Price is so a foot of one versus the other, are they comparable or?
Probably, yeah.
What about
Everything at the
availability?
moment is so fluid in terms of price, because trying to I didn't mean. But at the moment, people will pay a premium to get a particular type of pipe early rather than late. If ductile versus PVC, there's no real difference.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What's the availability? Is that what we're going to, when we go into this design, that we can actually look at, see what we can actually get?
Pretty wise to do.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah,
You think?
I've heard, stories that ductile iron is pretty tough to get right now.
Yeah, and PVC is getting worse.
Six.
Everything's bad. But yes, yes, we do the design. It's an academic exercise to a certain extent, but you have to have the practicality in there of can we get this at this time to get it done, particularly as this is an important project.
I just have one question. Are you, Coleman, how often do you go with Weber Deal, or is it, are you a team?
It was actually, we were actually doing a project, it's a development project in Plymouth. For I think this is Infantile Ridge, that we've designed a small wastewater pump station, and Weber Geo is doing the overview for the city, so we know everybody. I told these guys, and these guys know I was a Weber Geo employee back in 1997. So the first time, so I came back from overseas to live here permanently, and my ex-wife's mother worked, my mother-in-law worked for
Oh, I
Brook Weber's
think I
wife.
remember that story.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I think you told that story.
You know, I was a like 15, 16-year
Uh-huh.
veteran, but I didn't even have EIT. And they were looking for a junior engineer and I was like looking for a job.
Yeah.
So I got to learn how to do engineering in America, courtesy of Whoever Gear. So, yeah.
Can you work in feet and inches yet?
It's funny, I'm old enough now to remember that when I was a kid, it was feet and inches, and then we went decimal. So all the engineering I did in the UK was, and overseas was metric.
Yeah.
And then when I came here, luckily, all the professional exams were still in metric, so I could remember all that. And gradually, as time has gone on, I'm back in feet and inches, and miles, and pints, and rods, and poles, and perches, and all that stuff.
All right, well, I'm ready to make a motion. So we can stop here and you'll have a chance to let's turn it down.
Speaking of pints and quarts, let's get this thing going.
No, before you do your motion, I have a question. We've had some painful experiences with tribal issues in the past.
Sorry, John.
Are we aware of any sensitive areas that we might try to avoid this time?
Like our water treatment plant?
Yeah.
It's in their scope, you know, it's Ecor, who've done a lot of work for us in the past. They have, I can tell you their cultural resources people, are very good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you think about with this, where you're putting a pipeline in a road, you're thinking, well, you know, we're hoping we get a categorical exemption from CCWD. But, you know, funding, how you get, whether it's a requirement, you've got to do at least an initial study mitigating neg deck. I mean, if we can get away from that as we go through the design process, that'll be good because it'll save a significant amount of money.
Oh, pretty hard rock here. I don't think they buried a lot of people in that. The softest. I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution awarding contract, authorizing general manager, tender PSA with Coleman Engineering in the amount of $664,640 for design, engineering, and professional service related to Jenny Lynn Water Treatment System AB Transmission Pipeline Project.
I'd like to second that.
All right, any public comment in the room? Seeing none, any public comment online? All right, those all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, it passes.
Okay, we had another one.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the amendment of fiscal year 21-22 operating capital improvement project budget, adding $390,000 in funding for the Jenny Lynn Water System AB Transmission Pipeline Project.
Second.
All right, any public comment in the room? No. Any public comment online? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, that passes.
Thank you very much. We'll get
Thank you.
meeting still.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
And thank you, Matt Hospital, who's online with us as well. Thank you
Thank you,
both.
Simon. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And you're ready. All right, Michael, general manager report, short and sweet.
So recent development, and I promise you, we did not coordinate this with the financing plan, but it does underscore the importance of the action that the board took today is a sewer force main break right along the shore of Lake Fuller that spilled. into the lake.
What number project is that in our bond financing?
Number one, that's
Number
our
one.
station replacement project.
It just happened?
It just
right now?
That's what Jesse came in and told me, so I was talking to him at the break there, so.
And it's spilled.
Spilled into
into
the
the
lake,
lake.
so he's currently making that calculation right now as well to report that out. We're in touch with environmental health. We're notifying the.
Which project is it? You're saying it's a force main.
Yeah, but there's we call it the Copper Cove Lift Station Project, but there are force main.
Which one?
Okay, so it's this one over here. Okay. We better get on that.
That's the plan.
Can they isolate?
Yeah, no, actually, they've got a pumper truck down there right now where they're able to.
What number lift station?
It's the first one on the sewer side. It says the
I haven't found
Copper
the leak
Cove
yet.
lift stations. Right.
15 and 18?
That's the Lee and Rowe project that should have been done 2 years ago.
Oh. You've been,
17 isn't on here.
The Copper Cove lift station, 7.5
Will
million.
reduce the flow to the force main that we're working on right now. Anyways, I don't want to get
Yeah.
back too far back into projects, but this is the kind of thing we really want to avoid in the future. So really, that's right.
Well, Scott can't find it on the.
The,
Didn't happen.
so other, updates, and I'm gonna go as quickly as I can here, because I know we've covered a lot already. One interesting development, Randy Bowersox, you all know. Randy's been promoted. So he's now the assistant GM for generation services for NCPA, which will take him out of the office quite a bit. So he's all generation services, not just the hydro project. So my understanding is he'll be here a couple days a week, maybe still working out of this office, but he'll be out of here a lot as well. And their other generation projects are much larger than this one. So he's going to have a much bigger portfolio than he did in the past, but he'll still be involved in this one, which will be helpful for us. They're currently recruiting to that position, and Jake Iman, who's their GM safety engineer, who we know very well and work very well with, is currently the interim. And so I met with Jake last week and covered a range of issues. But we have, like I said, very good communication with Jake and don't expect it to impact us. But we're happy for Randy. He's always, even when we disagree, he's always been very, very good to work with and deserves the promotion, I imagine. So that's a big development as far as Highway 4 water goes. He's been in that position for a long time. And speaking of that, developments in Highway 4 water, I met with Summer Nicotero recently. We've had some email exchanges as well. I think she's going to be great. She's the new GM at UPUD. She started 3 weeks ago, I think, somewhere in that time frame, and is, I think, quickly getting up to speed and is going to modernize UPUD, I think. So Bill's still there working with her.
When is his last day?
I don't know. I think he's going to stay on for a while in a different role and help her sort of transition in. So I think that's good, a positive development for UPUD. And we've got, so other quick updates, the state sent out notification today to anticipate additional curtailments. The drought is still severe and it's not looking like that we're going to get a miracle March or any late storms to save us from that. So we'll do some more public outreach and we'll keep an eye out for any specific curtailment orders or probably be something along the lines of what we went through last year. We're also doing some, speaking of working with other agencies, we've had some good conversations with TUD about potential mutual aid arrangements and other ways that we can collaborate. I've had some really good conversations with Amador Water Agency as well about ways to potentially pool costs if there's some certain areas where that might make sense. And looking forward to more of those discussions with Larry McKinney at AWA and Don Perkins at TUD. I think it's a really positive collaboration. Really appreciate the board members making time for site visits. Director Underhill and Director Skata saw some of our infrastructure projects last week, or earlier this week and last week. And we are pushing out the arrearage funding that we got from the state. We expect that to be out in the next couple of weeks, and we'll do some public outreach on that as well. It's as everything, complicated process to deal with accounting and get the funds to the right people, but we're working through that process. Billing is much better already and nearly complete, and should be going out this week for cycle 1, which is everything but the Ebbets Pass service area. Still working through some bugs and ironing out some issues, but I think each time it's getting better, and hopefully next time we'll be truing up consumption, going back to the time when the meter was replaced in the Ebbets Pass service area, and then moving to cycle 1 after that. So those projects are, I think, knock on wood, we're through the hardest part. We still have some work to do, but staff's just been amazing at the level of effort and additional effort that it's taken to get through those. So I think that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions for Michael? Okay. Board reports, information, future agenda items. Bertha.
Okay, in my going around in my district, I'm just really happy to report or happy to bring back to the board about the good job that our outreach director, Jessica Self, is doing. She's attending a lot of meetings up in Abbott's Pass, and they do a lot of Zooming these days. They don't necessarily meet and everything, but she comes to all of the meetings well prepared. She's very articulate, and we have a good person representing CCWD.
Nice.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for mentioning that, because I want to thank Jessica and Kevin. We were on Kevin Williams, our engineer, we were on a Forest Meadows HOA meeting last night to talk about our redwood tank replacement project up there. And we got a few other questions. And so really appreciate Kevin and Jessica being available in the evening, and for Jessica to be available in the evening on her birthday was
happy birthday.
extra effort. So
Thank you, everybody.
Happy birthday.
That it, Bertha?
That's it.
All right, Scott.
You didn't even mention my birthday. I mean, I sang for you.
When was your birthday?
Last week, Saturday, yeah.
Are you gonna sing to him, Bertha?
Yeah.
Happy
Okay, will you
birthday,
Please sing
Russ.
with him, for him. To
Happy
him, I mean.
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Russ. Happy birthday to you.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Very good. Happy birthday. All right, Scott.
That's all I had was Russ's birthday.
Awesome. Thank you.
No. Mountain County's meeting, April 1st. We're gonna be meeting in Placer. We try to move the meetings for a little bit for the 7 board members to get to. We're meeting in Placer County Board of Supervisors Chambers in Auburn on April 1st. That's the only thing I
Really?
can report.
So tell me again what that wine
April
women,
Fool's Day, yeah.
That's what I said, really.
the wine women and.
Yeah, when is that one?
the
Women and
wine and
wildfires.
whatever is that's what Josh
In
Josh
October.
is kind of calling it. The wine and whatever event is we're honing in on October 20th. And
Wildfire.
What was that date? 8?
October 20th. So the Aqua Region 3 sponsored event, 10 to 2 at Native Sons in Murphy's, followed immediately by a Mountain Counties event from 2 to 10, basically, I think, or whenever.
Day for
whenever
the
it
Mountain
is.
Counties?
Same day, October.
We're not gonna keep everybody there till 10. It'll get over sooner than that.
I'll be there till closing.
In the bar.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
That'll be, yeah, good event.
That's all I got.
All
That's
right,
it.
thank you. Jeff?
I just started to think about something, since we're coming out of the whole COVID meeting action, or whatever, but I just started to think, I haven't seen anything, any press release or anything related to any of the obstacles or opportunities that we have. Haven't seen anything like that in quite some time. So I'd just like to see you guys kind of ramp back up on that, whether it's you or Jessica or even, Water Resources Manager. It'd be nice to get some commentary out there in the press because, ultimately we're going to be looking for more money and we have to start to educate people about why.
I think it's a great point. Jessica and I have been talking about that a lot. I think, and this is not to make excuses, but over the last few months, we were backfill vacancies, and we had a lot on our plates for that period of time. So I acknowledge there's been, and that's on me, that there's been a drop off on that front, but we're I think at a point where we've turned a corner, and we've got some draft press releases in the works right now. We're going to start ramping up on that.
Yeah, even just, it could be, several topics, just, about a current operation, but, I mean, people need to know what the state wants us to do with these electric vehicles. They need to know that that's something that we have to address. We don't have a choice on that. And how problematic that is. And then also,
Well, and I think also highlighting what staff has been doing on the front to advocate. Yeah. That's a great.
So I just like to start seeing things like that, and and even just maybe an annual, list of opportunities and projects or something like that.
State of the district report. It's good to know you have a whole lot more spare time these days, Michael. That's, we'll be in touch.
I do. I didn't mean to give that impression, but, and it is, just to circle back on that, because this is something some of the other directors have brought up as well. And we were working on a draft presentation that was, I think we were initially targeting the first meeting in March. Or might have been the second meeting in February, and because of some of the other things that were going on, we had to push pause on that, but the draft presentation is still in the works, and we can bring that back. We didn't want to put it on this agenda because we had a pretty packed agenda, but we have a draft that we've been working on to highlight some of the achievements over the last year plus.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Jeff.
That's it.
Russ?
How are we doing on that little cheat sheet thing about nearby agencies, how they compare to?
Yeah, Jessica did an updated version of that as well, that we can bring back at the, and I'll show it to you and share it with you and talk about what direction we want to go with it, and then we can bring it back to the full board.
Okay. Yeah, that press release that you were talking about, the lead item should be the sewer spill in Lake Tulloch today, so.
It could be.
Yeah.
But what it should be is that we took action today to finance.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should celebrate that. I mean, the next one I think we have coming out is the funding from the federal budget for the Section 219. And then, but I think the board action today is really noteworthy. Yeah. This is kind of a generational effort that we're taking on. So I think that needs to be highlighted as well.
Okay, future agenda items. I thought we were gonna possibly get the Jenny Lind school people back in to talk to, at least to the engineering committee.
We will, yeah, and I know Hugh was here last week or 2 weeks ago, and we'll put that we can put that on the next engineering committee agenda, which I think I want to confirm with you guys. We're going to shoot for a late April meeting instead of pushing it out all the way to.
Okay, that sounds good. I've heard discussion among the engineering staff about putting a sign on CCWD sign on the warehouse building. I would like to submit a suggestion that we not do that. I mean, we've got a sign up on the monument in the corner that identifies this facility, and I think it would, in a way, kind of cheapen that the look of that building. To have, like just advertising CCWD boldly on that building.
So you want
more money we spend.
Drop off pumps over to the propane place?
We want to put in the house, not put in the house.
Open.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
The bat signals.
Like maybe like where
there could be a little roadside sign there, but putting, up in the eaves of the building is just.
How are you gonna make a brass? You're gonna make a brass sculpture of you.
I'm working on it right now.
Weather vane.
Oh, Jeff. Give me time. I don't think I could think of something else.
No,
No,
Scott has something else to say.
That's it.
I forget it.
Go ahead, Scott.
I'll forget it.
You can take some light
No,
time.
no, the rest, it's all Russ's time, all about Russ.
Go ahead.
Are you done?
I'm
Are you sure? Russ, Scott, is there anything else
No.
you'd like to say?
Not
Sure.
yet.
Okay. The IRWM is going to try and meet in person. TUD has given us permission to use the spot that we used to, but they're not going to be in charge of any remote equipment if we want to do remote and in person. So they're working on that. I'll know next month when that happens. Also, Michael, are we still, I know we just passed the resolution for the remote calling, but is that something that's going to be ending real soon, like at the end of the month?
I don't think we have a date yet. I would expect it to, it's
Me
not going to
too,
last
yeah.
forever. There are a couple of bills pending right now that to address, to make some Brown Act amendments.
Okay.
And I think both of them would allow for board members to remotely join into a meeting without having to make the remote location publicly
Oh, that would be
available.
nice.
I think that's one of the components, especially at Aqua, that we've been pushing for.
That was really the technology has made that really pointless.
It really is pointless.
Because
And
if you can see somebody and speak to them, that's the exact same thing.
right.
you know.
And so, yeah, there is some legislation, but that's pending. And so whether or not the legislation will be in effect prior to, once the emergency provisions are lifted, we'll have to just monitor that timing, and there may be a gap that we're back to full-time in person. I think continuing to provide remote access for the public, we've talked about at the staff level, I think is a positive thing, and we should continue to do that. We are going to encourage consultants to be here in person more often. We've already talked to Julio about that. He'll be here on the 13th, not remote, because I think that is always better. I think it depends. If it's going to be a 10-minute, minor thing, and we don't need the cost of bringing a consultant here, but when it's something significant, it's going to be an important relationship. It's going to take some time to review. I think we're going to encourage those people to be here in person.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can just tear up this was a note I was going to tell you exactly about that.
There you go.
Yeah.
So about some future agenda items, I'd like to see if, an update, any kind of progress with the FERC licensing stuff. And then just a reminder, the slurry line update. And then are members of the public allowed in the building now? So
Yes.
they can do it? Okay. And we can't not let them in, correct?
For board meetings?
Yes.
That's right. So we're supposed to encourage social distancing.
Okay. That's it for me.
I mean, I guess we could not allow them. But
So, yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is it allowable or not?
Certain people.
it depends. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no law.
There's no restrictions on that right now.
Okay.
This is everybody who wanted to be here.
Okay.
We didn't keep anybody out.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier about
I'm
this,
sorry, your time was.
the state, beating the drum about drought issues and curtailments and stuff. I mean, I observed that we've got water levels in near reservoirs that are surprisingly high for now, attributable to that late December storm. We've still got snow in the mountain that's going to come down and fill them up a little bit. No,
I think the report came out today, we're a little over 50% statewide snowpack.
There's very, very little snow up there.
Yeah, looking at the long-term projection of runoff, and it's just almost the whole state is in severe drought.
Yeah.
well, the point of my lead up to this is, are they still going to insist on having unregulated flows for the salmon run and all that kind of stuff?
So the voluntary agreement negotiations have failed for the most part. I think it's safe to say at this point. So I think the expectation is the state will move forward with the environmental document for the unimpaired flow the quality control plan that would include the unimpaired flow regime. But when that goes into effect and whether it goes into effect during the years of litigation that will ensue, I think that remains to be seen still.
Well, it baffles me that the state isn't taking a more serious look at the success of the salmon propagation on the McCollum. I mean, you have East Bay Mud has had fantastic success. I mean, what was that figure? 60% of the salmon caught off the shore of
I think it's 30% of the commercial catch, but the river only contributes, I think, 3% to the delta inflow. So it's a
Yeah,
pretty
right.
impressive
So
number.
clearly we moved into visiting hours. Is that what we've done here?
visiting hours.
Okay,
I can
let's
assure you
move
that
on.
we have made that argument to the state in every
They don't
possible
care.
way at every possible opportunity.
Okay, Scott does want to say something.
I won't be here. Next item on our agenda is, as you're going to announce in a minute here, Cindy, is our next meeting. I won't be able to be here on the 13th. I'll be out of town.
Oh, you can't remote in, eh?
Call that.
Aw.
We have closed session.
We do.
Yes, so anyhow, the next meetings will be Wednesday, April 13th and Wednesday, April 27th. And noted that Scott will not be available on April 13th.
I will not be here on the 27th.
And Jeff will not be
We
here.
gotta cancel a meeting then.
All right, so moving on, we have a closed session item, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant
Thanks,
exposure
John.
to potential.
Good job.
Thank you, John.
Litigation, government code, section 549-569B22 cases. Any public comment? Seeing none. All right, we'll go into closed session at 4:02.
402, what the hell? How'd it get so late?
Jeff spoke.
Who's running this show?
No, it was Jeff.